kick off this week with a discussion of COVID and the future of transportation. As a quick welcome, we have Meg Pirkle, who's the Chief Engineer of the Georgia Department of Transportation, a position she has held since January 2015. As Chief Engineer, she oversees management of GDOT's engineering, construction, project management, and P3 program delivery for the department's $2.5 billion statewide capital program. She also oversees statewide maintenance, traffic operations, and intermodal activities. She earned her bachelor's degree in civil engineering from Vanderbilt University and a master's degree in civil engineering from Georgia Tech, and is a registered professional engineer. Hiral Patel is 24 years of experience in government service, focused in engineering, construction, environmental services, and program and project management. Since 2016, she has served as the director of the engineering division at GDOT. It oversees GDOT's offices of roadway design, design policy and support, environmental services, right-of-way, interagency office and environmental quality, bridge design, and bridge maintenance. Matt Markham works as the Deputy Director of Planning for the Georgia Department of Transportation, a role he assumed in September of 2020. Prior to joining GDOT, he worked at the Georgia Department of Economic Development, where he was the Director of the Center of Innovation for Logistics. Matt has served for nearly 15 years in a variety of leadership roles in state government agencies, including the State Road and Tollway Authority and the Georgia Regional Transportation Authority. He also has served as a senior policy advisor and speechwriter to the Lieutenant Governor of Georgia. Dr. Catherine Ross is a University System of Georgia Regents professor and a chair professor in the schools of City and Regional Planning and Civil Engineering. She currently serves as director of the Center for Quality Growth and Regional Development. She previously served as the deputy director of Georgia Tech's University Center for Transportation Systems Productivity and Management, and was the first executive director of the Georgia Regional Transportation Authority. Her research interests include transportation planning and impact analysis, data analytics, sustainable development, and freight and passenger mobility. And she is an expert on mega region planning and has conducted research and written extensively on that topic. I am Professor Hunter. I'm a professor at Georgia Tech, and I'm the director of the Georgia Transportation Center, so I will be acting as your moderator today. What we have is some sort of questions and some thoughts that we can ask the panelists. What I'm kind of hoping for is a conversation to get there. There's a diverse set of experiences here and a lot of leadership experience, so we're really excited to sort of hear their insights. If anybody else has any comments or questions, I'm going to ask you to use the chat box. It's a bit hard with the number of people to have folks sort of chiming in just on their voice. So please use chat, and we'll try to look there. And sort of kind of set this up, we know we're in unprecedented times. And in the short term, we've definitely seen some dramatic changes in transportation resulting from COVID. People have changed when and where they work, how and if they even travel, how they receive an education, right? How they shop, events they attend. And there's been so many more impacts the way they've changed. However, we're going to choose to believe for this panel, right, that someday, right, COVID is going to be in the rearview mirror, either through maybe a vaccine, the slowing of the spread, the change in the virus, whatever it is, right? The day's going to come where we're going to be past this. But today we want to explore the insights on the long-term transportation impacts we might see and the lessons learned from the COVID pandemic. So as a first question, I guess we'll look at today, right now, and I'm going to ask the panelists, and please, I'll let you sort of kind of each jump in and answer the question. But when you consider COVID over the past 10 years, this would be one sort of past-looking question, what were the most dramatic or unexpected impacts of transportation that you saw?
Hey, this is Meg. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, I think the most dramatic change is that it's lasted this flippin' long. I mean, I think when we all started last March, we were thinking, oh, it'll be normal around June. Oh, no, maybe August. And here we are, and things are still rolling along with the pandemic. So that's been the unexpected part. For me, the other unexpected part is that, seeing as how we are still in the middle of this, traffic has come back much more than I sort of thought it would by now. In the rural areas, it's almost like there's no change. It's the same as it was last year. And truck traffic is greater than it was this time last year. And in the urban areas is where we're really seeing the decline, and it's about 6 to 8% below what we would call normal. So.
Wow. Okay.
Let me follow up. I always make the statement that transportation and economics are in a hand-glove relationship. And I've been a bit surprised at the extent to which COVID-19 has allowed us to really examine that. If you look at what's happened kind of across all modes, it's had a significant impact. And I think about the airline industries. In some instances, transit is operating at just 10% of its capacity. We've seen some increase in cycling, big increases in Philadelphia and New York in that regard. Of course, the primary beneficiary is online shopping. That was going through the roof anyway, and that's continued, of course, with the shutdown that we've had. And it's going to be interesting to see, which we'll talk about later, what goes, what stays.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hiral? I'm getting some feedback. Uh-oh. Are you still with us? We may have lost Hiral. How about Matt? Are you still with us?
Yeah, I think I am. I hope I am
yeah,
anyway.
I hear you, Matt. Why don't you go?
No, I'll kind of echo what Catherine said. It has been amazing just how broad the transportation impact reach has been. I was a little surprised at how quickly and how long the sort of work from home model, and this is obviously more of an urban thing than rural, and the impacts on the urban transportation system. That the present technology issues this morning notwithstanding, we've all kind of quickly been able to embrace a lot of these different technology options and be able to use them to perform our work. And it has that impact, that sustained impact on transportation and congestion in the urban areas. I've been driving in to Atlanta, some, and still we are 6 months later, and it's still there's a noticeable decline in that passenger travel here in Atlanta, and it's been interesting to me just how long we've sustained that so far.
Yeah. Hiral?
Hey, can you hear me now?
Yeah, I got you now. Fantastic.
Yeah, my blue jean worked now for some reason.
Oh, all right. I can see you too.
Yeah, I'm here. I think that, initially in March and April, we saw some trends that, there was a significant decrease in passenger cars and micromobility devices like e-bike and ride shares. We saw a lot of decrease in that, but towards the June, it picked back up, and that was kind of surprising that even with so many people working from home in current environment, traffic is still, probably close to normal now. Also the e-commerce increased drastically during this time, so that affected the truck traffic, but that was kind of expected.
Now, I'm curious along the lines of this question. Does anybody want to say anything about budgets? Has the impact to the transportation dollars been more significant than one would have thought, or are we doing great? Anybody want to tackle that?
I'll jump in, Michael. I have been surprised by the extent to which the budgets have been sort of decimated from what I have been tracking across modes. And we were already in some instances sort of razor thin, I think, on the budget in terms of what we really need to improve our network. And so now you see, diesel, gasoline, diesel, all tax collections, revenues from other kinds of sources are decimated. State funds. I'm hoping the federal government is listening. I don't know, but I'm hoping we'll get a push and some light from the federal government to assist state agencies, because if we don't, I don't see how we get back or how we support the kind of activity we need to really make sure the economic piece moves along. So I'm very worried. And if you look at any of the numbers, they're down. Even our ports, the revenue stream has just been taking a really, really hard hit.
Yeah.
Dr. Ross, I hope you're right. I hope the federal government is listening. But I would just add that from the GDOT perspective, our current year budget was impacted by about $280 million. And most of this came out of capital projects and capital maintenance, which is resurfacing. but also about 40 million in routine maintenance, which is litter pickup and vegetation removal, that kind of stuff, and contract maintenance. And then, of course, admin functions, training and travel, those things got cut as well. And GDOT, as a state agency, we had about a 13.2% budget cut, whereas most state agencies had about a 10% budget cut. So ours was bigger than the rest. The legislature was nice enough to offset this a little bit with some bonds, about $115 million for capital projects, but we certainly are still seeing a budget cut. And federal government did pass the CARES Act last spring, which for Georgia provided funds for transit and aviation. And I think when you look at the transit piece of that, it was very good for the rural transit. They got about $75 million for 80 rural transit operators. But even though it's a much larger number for Metro, it wasn't. I don't think it was nearly enough of what they need or what they're seeing in impacts to their budget. And then for aviation, it was $410 million to the state of Georgia. Most of that went to the larger airports in Hartsfield, Jackson, but about $3.5 million of that was for the rural airports throughout the state of Georgia. So definitely some budget impacts. And we've also seen just expenses due to our pandemic response. We've spent about $2.5 million, trucking PPE and supplies all over the state of Georgia as part of the state of Georgia's response. And we've also invested in technology and everything we need to be able to keep our operation running. So there's that impact as well.
So I'm curious, the next area to think about is, as we go back to normal, right, what impacts do we think are going to remain? Are there going to be some things here that this is going to become the new normal? On the budget, do you see just always having PPE and are we always going to have to be addressing some of these things in the future? Is that sort of the moving forward plan? You may, because I know you brought it up, but that's.
Well, I mean, I think the initial big technology push that we had to have this year to make sure everyone has cameras, et cetera, and laptops, that will sort of, go off and then become just part of the regular routine maintenance of that. But, I think you're right, Mike. There will probably have to still maintain some level of PPE and those sort of things, depending on how well the vaccine works or where we are this time next year, those kind of things. I certainly think teleworking will be a permanent change for everyone, though, in some form.
I'd love to hear more. And I know, Matt, you brought that up too. I mean, do we think this is the long-term future?
I mean, I think it's going to be interesting to see. We're still in a phase right now where a lot of much of this is driven by the fact that it's still not safe, and then there's also a lot of government policies in place about gatherings and being in places, and so that's still determining some of the decisions that businesses are making. What's going to be interesting to see is once those start to ease off, how much of the productivity gains or maintenance that businesses have seen from being virtual or working from home, how much of that translates into just a permanent way of doing business, and then in moving into things like reducing their office footprint and things like that in order to accommodate a smaller workforce. And so I feel like I had said at the beginning that I was really kind of surprised at how quickly and broadly the sort of teleworking model was impacted and implemented, between government agencies, the private sector, and all of those different places that were able to do it. But it will be interesting to see once it's no longer a safety issue and it's more of a productivity and the way we want to do our business, how long that stays. And I think it's still maybe a little too soon to tell from that standpoint. But the technology is there, and that's interesting too. Is the innovators find a way to innovate, right? And so we've got several different ways now between Blue Jeans or Microsoft Teams or Zoom or all these different options, with technology to be able to make these things happen if we want to. It will be interesting to see once the hopefully soon safety issue has decreased, how much the companies still want to keep that.
Matt, I think you hit upon something that I think is going to be really a major consideration. It is what does profitability look like? What does service delivery look like? And of course, I think you're right. It's much too soon to know. And right now, there's also a fear of losing my job. I just have to make the argument that some people are probably very anxious and working particularly hard to make sure they are not one of the people that gets the pink slip or is laid off. And so the profitability for me is probably a year out. I may be on the generous side there. I don't think we really know what it means. And more importantly, how do you measure it? When you talk about the technologies, and I certainly agree, what are the metrics that, and businesses are changing these right now to look at how you gauge what the work level is, whether the really high priority items that drive decision making are correct enough that you can begin to measure what has happened as we've shifted from everybody in the office to different kinds of technology and applications in the workforce. So for me, all of that is still very much a guessing game.
Yeah, I agree. I think one thing certainly happened though during this pandemic. It helped us to adopt new technology very rapidly among all generations of the workforce. Our new generation was very, a fan of new technology, but this is now all over the organization. People adopted technology so fast, and that's why I think the work from home is going to be more after, even when we go to new norm. Because people have seen the efficiency and productivity even in virtual environment.
Yeah. I can't help myself. I'm always going to be a researcher here at some degree. So what a great research project, right? It's not one I would do, but for GDOT, what's the impact of people working at home versus working there? That'd actually be an interesting thing to sort of chase and come up with those metrics.
In the last few decades, like we will know big company with their big mark of prestigious properties or big signs on interstate, and that might change in future. That all these big firms or big companies may not have big properties, so that can change very much in future too.
So I'm curious on I don't know if personal is the right word, but on a more personal level, how has COVID-19 changed your jobs, right? As leaders of the state transportation, is what you do today a lot different than what it was, say, a year ago before all this happened?
Or that, when we first started COVID, there was no blueprint of what we're going through right now. So it was our first challenge was to focus on how to make our work portable across the organization. And I feel like at GDOT, what helped us most is our culture of collaboration and innovation. And organizational culture becomes way more important during this time than ever before. And I think because of that culture, we were able to adopt quickly the change in work environment. And I just give you an example for our people working from home, come up with the new ideas to get over or come over the obstacles that might bring with the new settings. We had several process changes, several innovations in our process changes. It's like innovation in emerging themselves in all aspects of transportation. So after we go to norm, or I would say new norm, probably we need to research and rethink on how to adopt or how to permanently implement some of these innovations that are ongoing right now. For an example, there is a federal requirement to hold public hearing in person, and we started holding this virtually, and because of the law requires us to do in person. We held in person with certain social distancing requirements, but we saw single-digit attendee numbers in person, and we received most of our comments and input from online. So that may change in future how we do some processes. I mean, it will make us rethink that this in-person meetings and requirements are really needed. or we can just use taxpayers' money and in more efficient manner and do more virtual environment to meet this requirements.
Can I just tag a little bit, Michael, a quick comment on this?
Sure.
And I agree about the importance of culture and collaboration. Something to think about. I belong to an organization and we're bringing new people in. They don't have the benefit of that. They are moving into a totally remote technology-driven environment. And so the very things that have allowed us to be innovative and to be able to shift very quickly, this culture that I think has been correctly referenced, won't be there for them. And so I do think there's some issues on the table for us to sustain ourselves in the way in which we've been quite successful. And one of those is what we're looking at now. We have new members and they don't know us. And we're getting to know them, but in a very much an arm's length way.
Yes, at GDOT, during this time of travel restriction and social distancing with our new hires, we had to take new approaches to how to integrate them in our culture and our processes. And at this time, during this time, it's becoming more and more important to as a leader or as a manager, you need to know a little bit more about personal life of your employees, what they're going through. There are some challenges with parenting and responsibilities along with the work responsibilities with people with small kids. And there are so we here at GDOT we try to do informal chats. Prior to our meetings, or we try to do some lunch and learn type of talk with our new employees to help them understand. And give you an example, it's very important, very critical if we hire a design engineer and put them in design office and they start on roadway design. It's very important for them to collaborate with their counterpart in environmental and right-of-way because the product they're going to deliver is going to be impacted by their other colleagues throughout the organization. So we had people came up with the creative ways to do the collaboration and meet with and communicate with various teams through the department.
So Meg, how about you have any thoughts on is being chief engineer in 2020 the same thing as it was being chief engineer in 2019?
Yeah, I mean, the work goes on, and just based on everything Hiral just explained, I mean, I feel like GDOT has not missed a beat since last March. So everything's been churning along, and I'm so grateful that we were somewhat prepared just in our normal preparation for emergencies. We were thinking it'd be, a hurricane or a bomb or something like that, and always working with other state agencies to be ready for something. Well, it turns out it was a pandemic, so luckily we were pretty set up to go virtual almost immediately with a few additions. So, but for the most part, the work is still the same.
Well, that's interesting. Let's, if I could build on that just a little bit. COVID, I do believe, is going to be gone someday, right? We can hope, or at least, always under the surface, I guess. But there's going to be another pandemic, right? There's going to be another big event. Is there anything from this pandemic, and it's stretching on for 10 months to whatever this is going to take, and all this? Are there any lessons that have been learned that are going to be applied here in the future, so we're more prepared in the future?
Let me just talk for a moment from the Georgia Tech side, which you know as well as I do. Georgia Tech.
I wouldn't talk about that, but all right.
Well, that's only fair. I would just offer that there's a level of preparedness and awareness that I think both GDOT and institutions and organizations nationally and globally will have to keep on their radar. There's an increased awareness, a notion about what kind of infrastructure we need in place in short order, so that when these pandemics or epidemics occur, how ready are we? How staff ready are we? How technology ready are we? How communications protocols ready are we? So, and I think that's something that we are trying to do here, which is to begin to layer our competency and think under a number of different scenarios what would be required, and how then do you make the kind of investment that allows us to have a successful response to those challenges.
Would anybody from GDOT want to talk about things that maybe, lessons learned for going forward to be ready for the next pandemic?
Well, if I have to think about it, when we first started, not all of our employees had teleworking agreements. So if we have to, so now I think we all going to sign teleworking agreements. So in future, if we have to suddenly change the work environment, we're ready with that tool. Also, it's important that we all get training. Even the leaders and managers needs to training to reset their mindset about how to manage people in virtual environment and how to manage people with objectives. So those kind of trainings now, we have been providing after COVID, but now those can become a part of the routine training here for us. Also, cybersecurity training comes as important, cyber-related awareness, which we started also here at GDOT a little bit before pandemic. But that's those kind of things that we didn't think that critically before COVID. It's now going to be routine within the organization.
And I think as an agency, we've been promoting teleworking for over 20 years, but even within our own policy, I think it took something like this to really open it up and be as flexible as we need to be, which is, I think, what every employer in the whole metro area is doing right now, is finding out just how flexible they can be. So I do think there will be permanent changes to our telework policy and how open we're going to be to multiple days and based on people's schedules and the kind of work they do and, and their communication requirements. So I think that's a good thing. And hopefully it's going to be a good thing for a lot of other corporations as well.
Well, Meg, to your point, disruptions historically have been a catalyst for change. So I think we all would buy into that. And it's been interesting to look at what that will have in terms of just behavior and trip making, and what you tend to find is that a lot of the non-essential trips tend to be reduced to a great extent or to a larger extent. And so it is an opportunity, which is why I think you referenced correctly, to think about how to do it better and what kinds of shifts we need to make, really keeping the safety of the people who work at GDOT and in the case of Georgia Tech faculty and staff first. And then looking at how you take these opportunities and improve upon the technology, the use of the technology that we have, and try to bring some innovation to those processes.
One thing I'll kind of add to this piece that I think is you talk about, how do we take the information we've learned to be better prepared for, a future pandemic or something like that. I think it's interesting to see what we've learned about how the users of the transportation system responded to something like this. And I'm talking about not just people, and we've talked about the teleworking, but the businesses as well, the manufacturers, the distributors, the people that need to move goods around. How do they, respond to these sorts of immediate changes in demand and the different needs that they had? When we think about the types of infrastructure challenges that we can meet, and Meg had mentioned about whether it's, if it's a hurricane or a bomb or something that might cause damage to a piece of infrastructure, you have to route around it, you have to adjust to it, then you have to fix the problem. This was a different type of challenge that we had to see, because it wasn't that the infrastructure itself got damaged, it was just the changes in the economy that just instantly came in and made people have to adjust. And seeing how they did it, seeing how they were being creative in using the transportation system, how they did things differently, and then to be able to see, how can we use that information as we think about the next time this would come, and what are the users of the system going to need, and how can we be best prepared to address that?
So I'm curious. We've been talking about this, changes more being permanent. Just as an example, and I guess I'm just going to put this out here. We had the I-85 bridge collapse, which a lot of people, they had to switch modes. They did the work from home, did a lot of, there's a lot of changes. GDOT did tremendous work, got that thing back up and running in 6 weeks. But I've always been interested that none of that seemed to stick, right? In most studies you see say, it's like it never happened. Everybody's back the way they were before. And I'm always a little curious, why do we believe this would be different than that, right? Anybody want to take that on? I don't have the answer. I just kind of made
I'll take a quick stab. I think we've developed something that we could call travel dread. And because it's tied to this issue of health and surviving. And I think that's a different order of magnitude. And so I don't think we will ever not have that on our radar now. And I think there's a lot of trepidation that's going to drive travel demand, travel behavior, investments on a go-forward basis because of that. And it doesn't dissipate easily. I mean, I'll share something that's kind of silly, but I think it's indicative. I now worry about maintenance a bit because I know what's happening to travel budgets. When I look at our infrastructure, I think, safety here, how are we doing? And that was never something that was on my radar now to the extent that it is. So I think we have to deal with the reality, and I think this is just a fundamentally different kind of a wake-up call because it's such a threat to survival, to human health.
Yeah, if I compare this with 85 bridge collapse, during that time, we didn't change fundamentally how we do our work. The only part was changed that our commute time to our work or the route we take to our work to commute. But this time around, there is a total change in how we work and how we do things, and that this environment is setting new social trends, new work trends. So this may have a little bit long-lasting impact than 85 bridge collapse.
So let's build off that a little bit. So long term, then we have more impact. Do we see any way that this might actually impact at the strategic planning level for the state strategic plan? You know, these 25-year plans. Is COVID going to find its way in there? Anybody want to tackle that one?
I mean,
Well,
I would say, you know, to our point about, I mean, there's always the need to look at resiliency and to look at these sorts of things as part of our long-term strategy. But kind of the points we've talked about earlier, as it impacts long-term, it's still hard to tell, I think, are these long-term structural changes right now, or are they temporary to be built in? So, I mean, the idea that we said, you know, truck volumes are back up where they were before and higher, you know, in the rural areas, travel continues roughly where it was before. It's in sort of these urban areas where we're still seeing some reduced travel times, but or reduced volume, is it going to be that way, you know, once we sort of feel like there's a vaccine or an all clear and kind of get back to normal? So it's hard to specifically peg, you know, 25 years out, is this still going to be the trend? I think we still need a little time on that.
Yeah, and I think, you know, certainly too soon to say. And I'm not supply chain expert, but you know, when we think pre-COVID, when industry think about optimizing supply chain, their focus will be on cost efficiency or best commercial outcome. But now they have to rethink that approach, and they will have to think about resiliency and having some critical goods available and not import them. So that may change our freight pattern, and that can have indirect effect on our roads and transportation also. One thing I would say that Georgia has a Governor Road Improvement Program, the GRIP program, and that is more critical now than ever before, because now we realize that it's not only traffic that requires capacity, but we need to be able to move goods through our roads, and that last mile delivery is very critical too. So in rural Georgia, so you know, but it's too soon to say the total impact that can bring on the transportation planning.
Michael, to go back to an earlier comment you made about wouldn't it be nice if we could learn, I think about the disruptions that have hit the supply chains and the logistics functions and the kind of flexibility and innovation and new partners that they've had to bring in with short-term, altered, and long-term agreements. It would be lovely to have a closer look at exactly what they have done. I've not seen any good work done for obvious reasons, maybe at this juncture, but I think there's a story there that we would benefit from substantially.
Yeah, you guys have actually jumped into the next place I was going to go, talking about logistics and some of those issues. I'm sort of curious. So now we talked a bit about the trucking side. Have you seen any impacts or any discussion about sort of the long-term impact, maybe to ports or some of the rail side?
Well, one thing that's interesting from the port side is that, I mean, January 2020 seems like 400 years ago now. It's been such a long year, but we were before the pandemic came in. There were already big discussions around global trade, the trade issues with China. There were concerns, so there were already some trends moving to these discussions. Hiral and Catherine had mentioned about how do we provide some diversification in the supply chain? How do you reduce dependence on one single mode or one single source for materials, and how do you manage to broaden that out so that you can be able to respond to these shocks in the system that you might get? And so those things have continued along. I think one thing I found very interesting and positive news is that while the port volumes are down, Georgia Ports Authority announced that they were only off about 1% in reduction. Now, granted, that's 1% less, where in previous years they've been growing, close to double digits in previous years. So that's a reduction from where their rapid growth we had, but it's still relatively steady. And we still had the largest ship ever to call on the East Coast. Came in September. So these sort of global trends are still continuing, and I think that the positioning that the state has us in, through the ports, through the inland ports, and through that ability to provide multimodal solutions, I think it's going to allow us long term to continue to build off of that.
A lot of the hits have been in like cruise lines, where you see just an upending in that regard, and so I think air travel. We talk about air travel and that expensive business ticket, but leisure travel is an important part of air transportation. And so you're seeing those kinds of issues figuring quite prominently into the reductions that we see. We think about the work trip, but there are other types of trips that are significantly impacting the kind of revenue stream and service we can provide. But cruise lines are underwater, no pun intended.
Let us hope not. So Meg, did you want to throw anything in there, the logistics side or even the strategic planning side?
I think they've both covered it really well. I mean, looking ahead, we still know that even though there's a lot of uncertainty, that hopefully the Georgia economy is still going to be growing. I mean, we're still looking at the ARC projection that, a mass the size of the city of Denver is supposed to move to Atlanta by the year 2040. So even though I hope a lot of these changes will remain constant and that we will see a huge uptick in teleworking, and that will help spread the congestion, and that alone helps freight move through our state, I still think we're still going to have to deal with congestion in some form, just because I think Georgia's going to continue to grow.
Yeah. So, all right, we'll build on that a little bit. I think I'd be amiss if I did not bring up emerging technologies, right? We've been hearing a lot about emerging technologies now for a few years, and automated connected vehicles, electric vehicles, all these great things. Are you seeing or hearing any impacts that, COVID-19 might have on either, whether these are going to happen, maybe rate of introduction system, maybe increasing, decreasing? Has that been on your radar?
You know, it hasn't been, but I reached out to a few people who work more in that space even than me, and I don't think people are expecting a big impact to the introduction of technology. I think it's coming. The changes might be, you know, is it more shared, like transit style technology, or more SOV or other kinds of technology where people are maybe less willing to share a ride with others. But I don't think this pandemic, though, is going to impact the big changes we are going to see in technology and transportation. I think that's a freight train that's coming.
I think it might impact the development, not in emerging existing technologies. One of the comments has been a little bit of a slowdown in the manufacturing of electric cars, just because some subset of that industry has moved to produce other kinds of needs based on COVID-19. So I think there are trends in the manufacturing side that are worth taking a look at with regard to what we might have expected and what we can anticipate now given budgets and COVID-19's reality.
Sure.
Yeah, and I'll add, I've, you know, kind of following more of the, if you talk about like autonomous truck development technology and some of those things that we've seen about, there's sort of two pieces to it. There's the technology piece and there's the regulatory and kind of public acceptance piece to it. And, you know, I feel like those two things are moving along still the same path. And so I don't know that this short-term impacts of COVID right now are really changing those trajectories. The technology is moving along at the pace that it is. And then as the public comes to understand, are we going to accept driverless trucks on our interstates, or what are the regulatory impacts of that? Those things still have to be developed, and I don't see COVID necessarily right now, the COVID work impacting that yet.
Interesting.
It's interesting. When I think about the e-commerce piece just a bit, and now I would argue that technology is chasing e-commerce in terms of trying to get those better aligned, just because of the exponential increase in e-commerce at this point in time. So you can, I think, expect to see some shifts. And of course, we'll see some emerging and more efficiencies in our technology as they grapple with how, in fact, to service that business to business, that business to customer market that is really expanding more than any of us could have anticipated. But as we said, disasters are frequently the catalyst for change. So I think we're absolutely seeing a lot of that at this juncture.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. And I think that one of the points where it's, I think, most interestingly obvious is the rapid growth in the online, the home grocery delivery and the home food delivery that came out. I mean, it was born out of necessity. You couldn't get your customers to your restaurants. You needed to find a way to get your food to your customers. And so technology has enabled that, you know, through things like Instacart or Grubhub or any of those number of services that you can get now. And it seems like, you know, they rapidly kind of built up a business model that they've been able to use. And I think it will be interesting to see, you know, as we move back to more normal, do those things stay? I feel like there had been a sort of slow move that, you know, grocery stores, Kroger and others had been making towards implementing that home delivery or curbside pickup, and this just made it, you know, just ramp up exponentially in these times. And so it's just to Catherine's point, it sort of is it was the catalyst for change to kind of make people move quicker on something that they were contemplating.
So, Matt, I'll use me for an example, a universe of one, admittedly. I never ordered groceries online. It would never even occur to me to do that. And I can tell you now, when things are, quote, back to normal, I probably will still order some things online. And I don't know that I would have ever have moved to that position as rapidly as I have, or at all, were it not for COVID-19.
So, sort of taking some of these other changes on how you're shopping and how we're doing these things, also how we travel. I'm curious, do we see, is COVID in the long term going to increase maybe some other modes? Now, we know we have issues on the transit side, but we hear, you know, about maybe more pedestrian facilities or even pedestrian lanes or cyclist facilities. Do you think that's going to get a renewed emphasis? Is this becoming going to sort of push that forward, or is it going to sort of be what it was? Are there any thoughts about some of that? Anybody want to jump on ped bikes?
Well, I can say a little bit about the multimodal transportation. There are many cities around the world and in the U.S. this time experimenting new things with their city streets. They are opening more for the pedestrians and bicyclists, and because there's a less traffic on the road. So there some of the cities they are allowing dining space out on the street for the social distancing purposes. And there are other viewpoint is that in e-commerce there may be some retail business or may not be out there as much as right now on the city streets. So there is a possibility that we may change new footprint of the city streets, based on the lesson learned from all this the thousands of experience going around the world. Hopefully there will be some research post-COVID, and that can change how we are thinking about we are thinking sharing space on the city streets.
Fantastic. Yeah. So, and I know we're coming up on time here. We got a little bit of a late start, but I do want to, before we close out, one thing is, early on we got to a little bit. I'd love to hear about how you see the impacts, particularly the long-term impacts, how it differs between rural and urban, because there tends to be there's a tendency, we're in Atlanta, to think more urban. How do you see that playing out? What's the difference between rural and urban and everything that's been going on?
I'll take a quick stab, and I thought Meg referenced what's happening to the level of traffic with rural areas. But one of the realities is that the age differential in rural areas and urban areas, they tend to be older than their counterparts on average. And so it begs the question of mobility and the kind of mobility, particularly when we talk about a pandemic, which is clearly on the table. And of course, we know in many instances they're taking quite a financial hit. A lot of them are supported on state funds. We just talked about that. So I think there's some challenges that confront them that we have the capacity to deal with in a different way, in a more efficient way in urban areas. So I do worry a lot about that in terms of access to hospitals and the kinds of needs that you have when you have a senior, more aged population that really resides in rural areas, not just in Georgia, but throughout our country.
Yeah.
Hey, Mike, this is Meg. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I think my phone dropped. Did you hear any of my response talking about bike and ped?
I didn't. I would love to hear your ped bike response. Please do it again.
It was so brilliant. I hope I can repeat it.
Please do.
Please do it.
Oh, no. What I was just saying is that I think that there has been in recent years a renewed emphasis on bike and ped, and I expect that to continue. I think if anything, this has shown that certainly those are important modes of travel and welcome modes of travel, and we've all been probably biking and walking more than ever in the last 6 months because that's pretty much all there is to do. But I do think it's very important that we continue to focus on providing safe alternatives for those, modes of travel. And I don't think, it's a quality of life thing. I don't think that's going to change. I'm curious though if the recent, increased move to the urban core that we've seen in Atlanta and other cities, if that's going to continue now that people sort of know, well, I can live anywhere and work anywhere, or if that's going to slow down. It'll be interesting to see just how people choose where they live now and if that really changes our development patterns. But Anyway.
How about rural versus urban? You want to chat a little bit? I know you had some thoughts there early on how COVID really, what has impacted those in a different way, or what are the differences?
I mean, as far as highways, the rural impact has been almost negligible. And the urban impact has been more of that commute pattern change. And so we've really seen the big decrease on state routes in the urban metro and on the interstates in the urban areas. But as far as like rural transit, they were hit really hard. I mean, they basically stopped working for a lot of our systems for a month, 2 months, just because people were afraid to get in a little van with other people. And so because that's their model, it'll be interesting to see how much that can recover. I mean, luckily they've gotten some federal funds to help them, make the gap before they get back to what is hopefully normal operations. But it'll be interesting to see. But I think as far as walking and biking, that's been the safest mode to travel in this, situation, because you're outside and you're not in an enclosed space with anyone else.
Yeah.
Lots of cities have developed floor streets to accommodate that. But I have another comment to make that Michael didn't ask us about. This is so good, has been so great, I think we should do it again. What do you say, Dr. Hunter?
Do the panel again? Definitely we should do the panel again. I'm game. And actually, as we end, so I know we're near the end. Are there any closing thoughts? Does anybody have any, last sort of wisdom regarding COVID and the future, and just, lift our spirits, right?
It was nice to have the GDOT staff personnel involved. I think we got some insight we would otherwise not have gotten. So thanks to all of you, and to you, Michael, for pulling this together.
Oh, no, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for your thoughtful questions. I was interested to hear the answers to the questions myself from the other panelists, and I've enjoyed this. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think you covered all aspects pretty much for this.
Well, thank you to the panel. We appreciate everybody's time. We know in this current situation, it's never easy. And again, bearing with us in the beginning. It's COVID technology challenges, right?
Yes.
So I really do appreciate everybody's time. This has been recorded. We'll post it. Again, this is our big kickoff for the Research Expo. So please take a few minutes. There's over 70 posters sitting out on the site, and there's a lot of really great research going on. Leave comments, for the folks who submitted. Also, if some of those, like, boy, I'd love to see maybe a panel on some of those posters, or you'd like to see a webinar on some of them, let us know. Leave that in the comment section. Maybe we can start setting up some webinars and doing some other things on those that people are really saying, hey, I'd love to see that. That'd be really interesting. So thank you to everybody who watched our panel, and we'll talk to you all again soon. Stay safe.
Have a great day, everybody. Bye.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you.